The city morgue was situated 3 stories beneath the bustling pavement of the city center. A subterranean bunker of concrete and reinforced steel where the silence didn't just exist. It felt like it was being manufactured. For Elias, the job was a financial life raft in a rising tide of insurmountable debt. He was 24, exhausted by the frantic pace of the daylight world, and possessed a temperament he believed was unshakable. The air down here was fundamentally different from the world above. It wasn't just cold, it was heavy, pressing against his eardrums like the atmosphere at the bottom of a deep, stagnant lake. The man who trained him on that final, overcast Tuesday afternoon was named Miller. Miller didn't look like a security guard. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside by a slow-acting parasite. His skin was the color of a wet sidewalk, and his eyes never quite settled, constantly darting toward the shadows that flickered in the corners of the corridors. He didn't offer a tour of the facility, nor did he explain how to operate the high-tech security monitors in the central booth. Instead, he led Elias directly to the aquarium, the glass-walled security hub in the center of the cold storage wing, and handed him a heavy ring of iron keys that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. "The rules are the job," Miller had said, his voice a dry, papery rasp that barely rose above the industrial hum of the cooling units. "The doors, the locks, the cameras, those are just for the living. The living don't come down here after midnight. The rules, those are for the rest. Do not deviate. Do not negotiate." Taped to the back of the scratched acrylic clipboard Miller shoved into his hands was a yellowed index card. The paper was brittle, the edges frayed and stained with a dark, oily substance that smelled faintly of copper and old lilies. The typing was uneven, the letters stamped into the fibers with a violence that made the O's and P's look like tiny, dark punctures through the page. Rules for the night watch. 1. Keep the temperature at exactly 34 degrees. If the thermostat climbs, do not adjust it. Leave the room immediately and go to the lobby. It is trying to vent, and the air will not be breathable for long. 2. If you hear a zipper opening in a room you just left, do not turn around. Continue to the next station and finish your log. Do not check your work. Whatever is coming out is no longer your concern. 3. The radio in the prep room only plays static. If you hear a broadcast, music, news, or a voice, turn it off immediately. Do not listen to the names. They are not intended for you. 4. Do not answer the service elevator if it opens on the basement floor. There are no deliveries scheduled after midnight. If the doors stay open, look at the floor. Do not acknowledge what steps out. 5. If you see a body on a gurney in the hallway that wasn't there before, cover its face. Do not look at its eyes. If the sheet is already missing, close your own eyes and walk backward until you hit a wall. 6. The weeping in the cold storage is a vacuum leak. Do not investigate it, no matter how much the voice sounds like someone you know. It will stop when it is full. 7. If the lights flicker in a pattern of 3, go to the break room and lock the door. Wait for the whistle. Do not look through the glass window, no matter what you see on the other side. 8. Never check the toe tags of the unclaimed. They don't want to be found, and they don't want to be known. Knowing their names gives them a bridge back. Elias had smirked as Miller spoke. He assumed this was an elaborate hazing ritual, a way for the jaded veterans of the morgue to amuse themselves at the expense of the greenie. He tucked the clipboard under his arm and began to whistle a tuneless song. But as Miller bolted for the exit stairwell, not once looking back, the silence of the morgue settled over Elias like a heavy leaden shroud. The first hour of the shift was unremarkable, filled only with the rhythmic clicking of his own boots on the linoleum. But as the clock struck midnight, the building seemed to exhale. The temperature in the main corridor began to shift. Elias looked at the digital readout on the wall. It was 36 degrees, then 38, then 42. Rule 1. Keep the temperature at exactly 34 degrees. As the numbers climbed, the air didn't just get warmer, it got thicker. It tasted of sulfur and wet copper. A faint, yellowish mist began to seep out of the vents, coiling along the ceiling like a living thing. Elias felt a sudden, sharp sting in his lungs. He remembered Miller's warning. It is trying to vent. He didn't reach for the thermostat. He turned and walked briskly toward the lobby doors, his breath coming in shallow hitches. Through the glass doors of the lobby, he watched as the corridor he had just left was swallowed by a sickly gold haze. Something was moving in that mist. A tall, spindly shape that pressed its featureless face against the glass for a long, agonizing minute before the vents finally hissed, sucking the fog back into the darkness. The temperature reset to 34 degrees. Elias stepped back inside, his skin crawling. Around 1:15 a.m., he entered the prep room. It was a cavernous space where the deceased were readied for their final examinations, featuring stainless steel tables that stood like silent altars. As he turned to exit the room after checking the locks, a sound cut through the drone of the ventilation. It was a sharp, granular friction, the unmistakable sound of a heavy-duty plastic zipper being drawn back an inch at a time. Rule 2. If you hear a zipper, do not turn around. Zzzt. The sound was punctuated by a wet, sliding noise. Elias's hand tightened on the door handle. He could hear the weight of the body shifting inside the bag as the seal was broken. He could envision the plastic parting, revealing a pale, waxen shoulder. Zzzt. Zzzt. It sounded like the bag was being opened from the inside. He heard the suction-like sound of cold, tacky skin pulling away from the plastic lining, followed by a soft, heavy thump as a limb hit the tile floor. Then, the sound of wet footsteps. Not walking, but dragging, as if the feet weren't quite lifting off the ground. He forced his feet to move forward, counting his steps. He felt a sudden, sharp drop in atmospheric pressure, and the air behind him suddenly smelled of old earth and salt. A voice, a mere vibration against the back of his neck, whispered a name he didn't recognize. He didn't look back. He slammed the door and leaned against it in the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs. By 2 a.m., the isolation was beginning to fray his nerves. He retreated to the aquarium and found the old analog radio Miller had mentioned. It was unplugged, its cord coiled like a dead snake on the desk. Suddenly, it crackled to life, the speakers spitting out a burst of white noise that made Elias jump. Rule 3. The radio only plays static. If you hear a broadcast, turn it off. The static cleared with surgical precision. A crisp, melodic voice, like a 1940s news anchor, began to speak. Good evening, citizens. Tonight's local casualties include Sarah Jenkins, 42, Michael Thorne, 19, Elias Thorne, 24. Elias felt the blood turn to ice. The voice continued, reading his own home address, followed by the time, 4:12 a.m. Then it began to describe the state of his body, the precise location of the incisions, the weight of his heart, the contents of his stomach. He lunged for the radio, but the power knob was stuck, frozen in place by some unseen force. The volume began to swell, the voice booming through the glass booth until it was a rhythmic, distorted screaming of his own name. He grabbed a heavy flashlight and smashed the unit until it was nothing but plastic shards and copper wire. Even then, a faint, tiny voice seemed to emanate from the ruins for several seconds. Cause of death. Curiosity. At 2:45 a.m., the service elevator bell rang. Ding. The doors groaned open on the basement floor. Rule 4. Do not answer the service elevator. If the doors stay open, look at the floor. Elias stared from the safety of the glass booth. The elevator cabin was bathed in a flickering ultraviolet light. It appeared empty, but as the doors stayed open, a thick gray fog began to roll out, smelling of stagnant river water and rotting kelp. He remembered the rule and dropped his chin to his chest, staring intensely at the grout lines of the tile floor. From the darkness of the elevator, a shuffling sound emerged. Slap, drag, slap, drag. It sounded like someone dragging a heavy sack of wet grain. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a pair of feet, gray, bloated, and covered in a fine layer of white silt, cross the threshold. They paused in front of his booth. He could hear a low, wet gurgling, like water draining from a pipe, and the sound of something heavy and wet hitting the glass of his booth. He stayed frozen, counting his heartbeats, until the elevator doors finally hissed shut and the lift rose back to the surface. When he looked up, the hallway was bone dry, but a single perfectly formed handprint of salt remained on the glass. The third hour of the shift brought a new horror. As he walked toward the cold storage wing, his flashlight beam swept across a gurney parked in the middle of the hallway. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Rule 5. If you see a body on a gurney, cover its face. The form on the gurney was draped in a yellowing white sheet, but the sheet was too short. A pair of blue, mottled feet poked out from the bottom. As Elias watched, the sheet began to slide downward, caught on the bridge of a nose. The sheet was slipping faster now. A tuft of matted, dark hair appeared, then a forehead of bruised gray skin. He could see the eyelids beginning to flutter. Elias grabbed a spare sheet from a nearby laundry cart, his eyes fixed strictly on the laces of his boots. He lunged forward, throwing the fabric over the head of the form just as the original sheet fell away. As the new fabric settled, he felt a cold, firm hand, solid as a stone, grip his wrist. The grip was inhumanly strong, the fingers digging into his radius and ulna. He let out a strangled cry, wrenching himself away with a burst of panicked strength. He stumbled back, and when he finally caught his breath and looked up, the gurney was gone. The hallway was empty. Around 3:30 a.m., he entered the cold storage area. A sound drifted from the far corner, a low, ragged sobbing. Rule 6, the weeping, is a vacuum leak. Do not investigate it. It was the sound of a woman who had lost everything. It was heartbreaking, primal, and echoed off the metal surfaces of the drawers. He stood at the entrance to the refrigerated room. The sobbing blossomed into words. "Elias, is someone there? Please, it's so dark in here." He gasped. He knew that voice. It was his younger sister, Sarah. "Elias, I can't breathe. The plastic is over my face. Help me." He reached for the handle of drawer 214, his thumb hovering over the latch. His sister's life seemed to hang in the balance. But then he remembered Rule 6. It will stop when it is full. He retracted his hand, his eyes stinging with tears. Instantly, the sobbing stopped and was replaced by a violent metallic thumping from inside the drawer. It sounded like someone was kicking the steel with massive bare feet. The metal began to dent outward, buckling under the force of the blows. Elias backed away, his hands over his ears, until he reached the security booth. At 4 a.m., the lights didn't just flicker. They died in 3 distinct rhythmic pulses. Darkness. Light. Darkness. Light. Darkness. Light. Rule 7. Go to the break room and lock the door. Elias sprinted. He didn't care about the noise of his boots on the tile. He burst into the break room, threw the deadbolt, and slumped into the corner. He remembered the warning. Do not look through the glass. But the curiosity was a physical itch. He leaned forward and peered through the small, wired glass window. The hallway was gone. The morgue had vanished. In its place was a vast, subterranean cavern filled with thousands upon thousands of gurneys, stretching into a dark, foggy infinity. On every gurney sat a figure wrapped in a gray, translucent shroud. They were all sitting upright, their heads slowly rotating in unison to look toward the break room door. Then came the whistle. It was a high, piercing note that sounded like a steam vent shaped into a melody. It was a command. The shrouded figures began to slide off their gurneys, their movements fluid and predatory. Elias backed away from the door, his heart failing him, and huddled under the laminate table until the light surged back to full brightness. The final hour was a blur of terror. He walked, leaden-footed, to the unclaimed wing, the graveyard of the nameless. He saw a tag hanging from drawer 402. It was a deep, bruised purple. Rule 8. Never check the toe tags of the unclaimed. Elias reached out. He felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. He wanted to know who he was going to be. He flipped the tag. The tag was a mirror, a small, polished piece of silvered glass. In the reflection, Elias didn't see his own face. He saw Miller standing behind him, grinning with a mouthful of black fluid and no eyes. "Shift's over, Elias," Miller's voice whispered, though his jaw remained frozen. Drawer 402 didn't just open. The wall itself seemed to peel back. A dozen gray, elongated hands reached out from the void. They wove into his clothes and his hair with a sickening tenderness. Elias tried to scream, but his mouth was filled with the taste of salt and cold iron. He was pulled into the drawer, and the steel slammed shut with the finality of a tombstone. The next morning, the morgue director arrived at 7 a.m. He didn't look for Elias. He simply walked to the aquarium, picked up the clipboard, and wiped a smudge of black fluid off the desk. He sat down at his typewriter and began to type a new list of rules. Beneath Rule 8, he added a final 9th instruction. 9. If you find a security badge on the floor with the name Elias, do not pick it up. He is still on duty, and he is very protective of his station." The director smiled and posted the advertisement. Somewhere in the dark, a zipper began to open.